Did that gospel sound like good news to you? It doesn't particularly to me, unless I really pay attention, but this morning I thought it would be interesting to hear a poem called Optimism, which serves as a sort of counterbalance to the words that we just heard. It's by the poet Jane Hirshfield. More and more, I have come to admire resilience. Not the simple resistance of a pillow, whose foam returns over and over to the same shape, but the sinuous tenacity of a tree. Finding the light newly blocked on one side, it turns in another. A blind intelligence, true, but out of such persistence arose turtles, rivers, mitochondria, figs, all this resinous, unretractable earth. A long time ago, there was a seminary professor who advised his students that as they were preparing to preach and to put together a Bible study or some other demanding theological activity, he advised them to be sure to have in one hand the Bible and in the other hand the New York Times. And the point was, of course, as you can understand, that we have to be cognizant of the scriptures that we're paying attention to and trying to understand, while at the same time we're paying attention to what's going on out there. This is my old study Bible from the 1970s, and it is worn, and it is written in, and the pages are turned over, and there's sticky notes, but I can find just about anything in here if I need to. It's an old familiar friend. But it continues to confuse and to bring consternation to me, as does this, full of violence and death, destruction. Scary things are happening out there right now. So we hear these two things and we try to make sense of that. Like me, maybe you see the parallels between then and now. The chaos and corruption and cruelty that seeps out of these pages sounds an awful lot like the situation described by the writer of Luke's Gospel that we just heard. And maybe like me, you're tempted to imagine that the Gospel writer could see into the future. How was Luke able to predict the conditions of life in the 21st century and speak directly to us with his words? Well, you realize that he was describing what had happened in the time of Jesus, but he was looking back 50 or 60 years. Remember, Jesus died about 33 CE, or AD, as we used to say. And Luke was writing about 90 CE, or AD. So he was looking back at the time of Jesus and putting words into Jesus' mouth as he understood them and as he was inspired by the Spirit to do. At the time he was writing, the Palestinian Jews were experiencing tremendous trauma. And so as Jesus is kind of sounding like he's predicting, Luke knows the end of that story. And so he's able to guide the readers, guide his community in understanding the truth of what has been happening. The Romans had indeed, by the time Luke was writing, destroyed the temple and had wreaked havoc on the community of believers that we call believers in the way, called Christians now. And they were persecuting those folks by the official order of the emperor. And here we are listening to this prediction as if it applies to us. I've always wondered about this. Is it actually the case that throughout history, something close to these awful events has taken place in every generation somewhere in the world? Maybe the truth of the writer of Luke describes something that is universal for all times. And that truth is that man-made suffering and strife is part of the human condition. What are you afraid of right now? It feels as though there is a culture of fear out there, both out there and in here. And perhaps those fears are personal. Will my retirement last as long as I will? Am I doing enough to make the world better? Will my kids be okay? Will my health hold out? Or perhaps you're fearful of the bigger things. Will our planet survive as we continue to destroy its health? Will our democracy survive the battering and dismantling that it's undergoing now? Fear and anxiety is baked into our very nature. And they are the reason for our fight, flight, or freeze responses when we're faced with serious threats to our health and well-being. You and I are deeply familiar with these responses. If someone or something, like a bad guy or a Mack truck barreling towards us, is going to hurt us, we feel that shot of adrenaline and we act. If we get bad news from the doctor or our boss or even a loved one, there is that gripping, twisty emptiness in our gut. You know what that is. We know things are not going to turn out well. Well, from Luke's words, we can see his suggestion to us. He suggests that we step through our fears by reframing them. Rather than a threat to our body, mind, and emotions, we imagine our fears to be a challenge to our claim to be followers of Jesus. He turns us to imagining these opportunities to act differently, to respond differently, being confident that whatever happens, we belong to God. Not a hair on your head will perish, he assures us. In other words, speaking contemporarily, as Einstein explains, the energy of who you are, what we would call your soul, can never be destroyed. It may change form when we die, but we and the energy of all creation will always be present. Fear and pain are realities of our human existence and have been from the very beginning of time, through apocalypse after apocalypse. Jesus has been there. Jesus is here. And Jesus will be there at the end. When we experience the chaos and destruction described in Luke's gospel, we are part of an eternal, resilient energy known as God's love. Remember that. Take heart. Be not afraid. And here's the poem once again. Optimism. More and more I have come to admire resilience. Not the simple resistance of a pillow whose foam returns over and over to the same shape, but the sinuous tenacity of a tree. Finding the light newly blocked on one side, it turns in another. A blind intelligence, true, but out of such persistence arose turtles, rivers, mitochondria, figs, all this resinous, unretractable earth.